The morning sun peeked through the half-closed blinds of my study, casting soft golden stripes across the oak desk where I sat, nursing a cup of lukewarm coffee. The air was heavy with that strange mixture of comfort and emptiness that only comes with age. I turned 70 that day. 70. It felt like such a colossal number. One that belonged to old men who dozed off in front of televisions. Not to me. Yet here I was, surrounded by the silence of a house that once echoed with laughter, music, and the patter of little feet. I looked at the clock. 8:05 a.m. My daughter, Lily, usually called early on my birthday. Ever since she was a child, she'd burst into my room with a handmade card, singing some off-key version of Happy Birthday. I smiled at the memory, her pigtails bouncing, her eyes lighting up like tiny suns. Those were days when her world revolved around me and her mother, before college, before her husband, before everything grew complicated. Now, all I had were digital notifications from old friends and former colleagues, some automated messages from Facebook, and a message from my banker wishing me a prosperous year ahead. No message from Lily. I tried to tell myself she was busy, maybe with the kids, or perhaps she was planning a surprise. She had done that before, a dinner one year, a family gathering another. I convinced myself that maybe, just maybe, she wanted to make this one special. I got dressed slowly, choosing the gray sweater my late wife, Margaret, had knitted for me a few winters before she passed. It still carried her faint scent of lavender, though it was fading. I touched the wedding ring on my finger, something I'd never been able to take off. You'd have reminded her. I whispered to the photo of her on the mantel. You always made sure birthdays meant something. The phone finally rang at 12:47 p.m. I glanced at the screen. Lily. Relief flooded through me. I answered quickly, almost too eager. Hey, sweetheart, I said, smiling despite the dull ache in my chest. I was starting to think you forgot about your old man. There was a pause on the other end. The sound of rustling papers. A baby crying faintly in the background. Then her voice. Flat, distracted. Dad, I didn't forget. I don't have time today. Don't expect a party, or anything. Okay, we're trying to save money this month. The words hit harder than I thought possible. Don't expect a party. She said it like she was doing me a favor by remembering it all. Oh, I said quietly. No, that's fine. I wasn't expecting anything. Good, she replied, her tone clipped. I'll call you later this week, okay? Maybe we can do dinner sometime soon. Gotta go, Dad. Kids are fighting again. A click. The line went dead. I sat there for a moment, phone still in hand, listening to the silence grow heavier. It wasn't the first time she'd brushed me off, but something about her words that day stung in a way I couldn't quite explain. Not because I wanted a grand party, not even a gift. I just wanted to feel remembered. To be seen by the one person left in this world who was supposed to care. For a long while, I stayed in that chair, staring out the window at the empty driveway. I could almost see her as a child, running up with a cake she'd baked herself. Half burnt, icing smudged, but eyes bright with love. I made it for you, Daddy, she'd said back then. I'd never tasted anything so perfect. Now, she couldn't even spare an afternoon. The hours crawled by. I made myself a small lunch, just soup and toast, and sat at the table where once birthday balloons had hung. I remembered the year Margaret surprised me, with a gathering of all my old friends from work. How she'd cooked all my favorite dishes. Lily had helped decorate the house, insisting on putting up a "World's Best Dad" banner that hung crooked, but made me prouder than any award I'd ever received. Those days were gone. The walls still held the memories, but they were just echoes now. At around 3, Maria, my housekeeper, arrived as usual. She was a kind woman, in her 50s, with gentle eyes and a laugh that could brighten any room. Mr. Carson, you look tired, she said, placing a hand on my shoulder. You should be celebrating today. I smiled weakly. Celebrating what, Maria? Another year of watching the world move on without me. She frowned. Don't say that. You have a beautiful home, a family. I cut her off softly. A family who's too busy to even call properly. Maria's eyes softened. She didn't ask questions. Instead, she went into the kitchen and returned with a small slice of lemon cake she'd baked that morning. Happy birthday, Mr. Carson, she said, setting it before me with a candle in the middle. The gesture nearly broke me. I stared at the flickering flame for a long moment before blowing it out. I didn't make a wish. What was left to wish for? After Maria left that evening, I poured myself a glass of whiskey and sat by the fireplace. The house was too quiet, the kind of quiet that hums with memories. I thought of Lily's first bicycle, how I ran beside her for hours, until she could balance on her own. I thought of her college graduation, how proud I was sitting in the audience, clapping until my hands hurt. I thought of her wedding day, when I gave her away with tears in my eyes, and a heart full of hope that her husband would love her as much as I did. Somewhere along the way, the closeness faded. At first, it was the occasional missed visit. Then it became months between phone calls. Then came the requests. Money for her husband's business, help with their mortgage, tuition for the kids. I never said no. Every check I wrote felt like a piece of my heart being handed over. A way to keep her close. To remind her I was still here. But love bought with money is never real, it's rented. As I sat there, I realized I wasn't angry, just deeply, profoundly sad. Not for myself, but for what our relationship had become. I had always believed that family was built on unconditional love. I never imagined mine would be reduced to transactions and excuses. The phone stayed silent for the rest of the evening. No second call, no text, nothing. I considered calling her again, maybe saying that her words had hurt me. But what would that change? She would apologize out of guilt, not love. I didn't want that. I wanted something genuine, something she didn't seem capable of giving anymore. By the time the clock struck 10, the whiskey bottle was half empty, and the ache in my chest had settled into something cold and resolute. I stood up, went to the study, and opened the safe. Inside was a neatly folded envelope containing my will. One I'd updated just a few months earlier, leaving everything to Lily: the house, the investments, the $7.5 million estate I had spent my lifetime building. My pen hovered over her name for a long time. I thought of all the times I had defended her, when people said she was selfish. I thought of how Margaret used to tell me, "She's just young, she'll grow wiser." But wisdom never came, only distance. Finally, I crossed her name out. The sound of the pen scraping the paper was sharp, final. I wrote in a new name, Maria Alvarez. She had been with me for nearly a decade, cared for me with respect and warmth, never once asking for more than her due pay. When Margaret died, Maria stayed with me through the hardest nights, listening to my stories, making sure I ate when grief made me forget. She had no family nearby, no fortune, no expectations. She gave kindness freely, and in that moment, I realized, that's who deserved my gratitude. I signed the amendment, folded the document back into the envelope, and placed it in the safe. A strange peace settled over me, the kind that comes from clarity. I wasn't acting out of vengeance or bitterness. I was simply letting go. Of guilt, of disappointment, of the illusion that money could buy back affection. I returned to the living room, the cake plate still sitting there. Crumbs scatter, candle melted into wax. I picked up the photo of Margaret again, and whispered, "You'd understand." The house was silent, but this time, it didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like freedom. I turned off the lights, walked to my bedroom, and paused at the door. For the first time in years, I didn't check my phone one last time before bed. There was nothing I needed from it anymore. As I lay down, the faint hum of the clock filled the room, steady and patient. The world outside continued as it always did, uncaring of birthdays or regrets. But I knew that tomorrow, when the sun rose again, I'd wake up lighter than I had in decades. Because I had finally given myself the gift I'd been waiting for all along. Peace. The next morning came softly, sunlight spilling across the polished floors of my quiet house. I hadn't slept much. My mind kept replaying the phone call with Lily, her sharp tone, her cold words. Don't expect a party. They rang in my ears like an echo I couldn't silence. It wasn't the lack of celebration that hurt me. It was the lack of heart. After 70 years of living, I finally understood something bitter. Love doesn't fade because of time. It fades because of neglect. I went to the kitchen and poured myself a cup of coffee. Maria was already there, humming faintly as she tidied up. "Good morning, Mr. Carson," she said with a kind smile. Her accent still carried the melody of her home country. "How are you feeling today?" I wanted to tell her the truth, that I felt invisible. But I just said, "Better. Thank you for the cake yesterday." Her smile deepened. "It was nothing. You deserve to be celebrated." That word, deserve, lingered in the air. It had been a long time since anyone said it to me. I watched her move around the kitchen with ease, preparing breakfast not out of obligation, but genuine care. She asked about my sleep, reminded me to take my pills, and talked about her grandchildren overseas. Every word she spoke was filled with warmth that I hadn't felt from my own daughter in years. When she left that afternoon, the house fell back into silence. I wandered into the study, where my life hung in frames along the walls. Certificates, awards, and photographs. There was one of Lily at age 5, wearing her mother's pearls, pretending to host a tea party. Another from her wedding day, standing beside her husband, her face glowing with joy. I traced her smile with my finger, remembering how proud I was that day. I remembered, too, what came after. The first few years of her marriage were filled with phone calls. Some happy, most asking for help. She and her husband had big dreams, bigger than their income could manage. I'd always said yes. When their business failed, I wrote a check. When their house payments fell behind, I paid them off. When they wanted to send their kids to private school, I covered the tuition. I told myself I was doing what any good father would do, giving his child a better life. But over time, every favor made her a little more distant. Gratitude turned to expectation, and expectation turned to entitlement. The calls became fewer, the words colder. I began to realize that she no longer saw me as her father, but as her safety net. It hurt more than I'd ever admit. That evening, I sat in my armchair by the fireplace, a soft crackle breaking the silence. The air smelled faintly of oak and old paper. I opened my journal, something I hadn't touched in years, and started to write. I didn't know why. Perhaps it was a way to make sense of the ache inside me. "I've spent my life building something," I wrote. "Not just wealth, but a family. And now, I find myself alone in a house, filled with everything except laughter. Money can't buy what I lost, and what I lost was never taken. It simply drifted away, piece by piece." My hand trembled as I closed the journal. I poured myself another drink, the amber liquid reflecting the glow of the fire. The warmth spread through me, but it couldn't reach the chill inside. That's when I saw it. The safe in the corner of the study. I had opened it so many times for financial matters, investments, papers. But that night, it seemed to call to me for something deeper. I stood, my movements slow, deliberate. The safe's door opened with a familiar click. Inside lay a few important documents, including my most recent will. I took it out, sat at the desk, and unfolded the crisp pages. My name, Edward Carson, printed neatly at the top. Beneath it, beneficiary Lily Carson. I stared at her name for a long time. $7.5 million. That was what I had worked my entire life for. Long nights, missed vacations, stress, sacrifice. I did it all so that she would never have to struggle. I imagined her reaction upon inheriting it. Not gratitude, but perhaps relief. Relief that her financial troubles would be solved. Not joy that her father had loved her enough to leave her everything. And that realization hurt more than any rejection could. I leaned back in my chair, the pen cold in my fingers. Could I really do it? Could I cross out my own daughter's name? But then, another image surfaced. Maria standing by the sink that morning, humming softly, smiling despite her own worries. She never asked for more than she needed. She never treated me like an obligation. She treated me like a person. When I had pneumonia 2 years ago, it wasn't Lily who sat by my bedside. It was Maria. She came in early, stayed late, made soup from scratch, and read me stories from the paper to keep my mind sharp. She'd even brought a small photo of her family, and said, "They all pray for you. Miss R. Carson." I remembered how that simple gesture had touched me more deeply than any gift I'd ever received. I picked up the pen again. The paper trembled slightly under my hand as I drew a slow, steady line through Lily's name. The ink bled into the page like a wound. Then, carefully, I wrote Maria Alvarez. It was such a small act, yet it felt monumental. I didn't feel anger, only release. I wasn't punishing Lily. I was freeing myself from the illusion that love could be measured by inheritance. I sat there for a long time, staring at what I'd done. Outside, the night deepened, and the fire dimmed to embers. The room felt heavier, quieter, yet strangely lighter. I realized this was the first decision I had made in years that was truly mine. Not out of obligation, not out of fear, but out of peace. The following morning, I met with my lawyer, Mr. Harding, an old friend who had handled my affairs for decades. He was a precise man, gray-haired, always polite. He adjusted his glasses as he looked over the updated will. "Are you certain about this, Edward?" he asked, glancing up. "It's quite the change." I nodded. "More certain than I've ever been." "May I ask why?" I paused. "Because I've finally realized who my real family is. It's not about blood, John. It's about who's there when it matters." He studied me for a moment, then gave a slow nod. "I'll have it notarized by tomorrow. You understand this means your daughter will be excluded?" "I do," I said quietly. "And if she ever asks why, tell her the truth. She already made her choice." When I left the office, the air felt different. Crisp, freeing. I walked down the city street, feeling the weight lift from my shoulders. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like a man waiting for affection. I felt like someone who had taken back control of his own heart. That night, Maria made a simple dinner. Roast chicken, potatoes, and a small glass of wine. We ate together at the dining table, something that had become rare in this big, empty house. She laughed as she told me stories about her grandchildren. How the youngest wanted to be a pilot. How the eldest was studying medicine. Her voice filled the house with warmth, the way Lily's once did. I listened, smiling, feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Connection. After dinner, she began to clear the table, but I stopped her. "Maria," I said gently, "sit with me a while." She looked surprised but obeyed. "You know," I began, "I've been thinking a lot lately about family and what it really means." She tilted her head, listening. "People always think it's about blood, about who's related to you. But I don't think that's true anymore. Family is who shows up. It's who stands beside you when you're forgotten by the ones you love." Ah, her eyes softened, and she reached across the table, placing her hand over mine. "You're not forgotten, Mr. Carson," she said quietly. "You just loved more than some people know how to love back." Her words hit me deeper than she could have known. After she left that night, I went out onto the porch and looked up at the sky. The stars were faint, the air cool and crisp. I thought about Margaret again. What she would say if she saw all this. She had always been the heart of our family, the bridge between me and Lily. After she died, that bridge collapsed, and I never learned how to rebuild it. I whispered into the night. I tried. "Margaret." I really did. The wind carried no answer, just the rustle of leaves, and the sound of distant cars. Inside, the will sat locked in the safe once again. Final, unchangeable. I knew it might one day shock Lily. maybe even enrage her. But I also knew it would teach her something she never seemed to grasp. Love cannot be ignored and expected to stay. For the first time in years, I slept soundly. No tossing, no dreams haunted by regret, just peace, quiet, honest peace. When I awoke, I felt lighter, as if a lifetime of unspoken disappointment had finally lifted. I made coffee, opened the curtains wide, and let the sunlight pour in. The house still felt empty, yes, but no longer cold. It was simply mine, a space that carried memories of love, loss, and lessons learned too late, but learned nonetheless. I stood there, mug in hand, and whispered to the stillness, "I'm done waiting to be loved. From now on, I'll love myself enough for both of us." And that was the moment I realized I hadn't lost a daughter that day. I'd simply found my freedom. A week passed after that long night of quiet resolve. I didn't hear from Lily again, though I hadn't expected to. I spent those days in a peaceful rhythm. Morning walks around the garden, afternoon tea with Maria, and evenings by the fire, reading books that had gathered dust for years. The world felt slower, calmer, as if the weight I'd carried on my heart had finally dissolved. Yet, beneath that calm, there was still a hollow space. The kind that love once filled and absence made louder. Then, one bright Saturday afternoon, I heard the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. I looked through the window and saw a silver SUV pull up. Lily's car. My heart hesitated, torn between hope and dread. She hadn't visited in months, and her sudden appearance could only mean one of two things. Either guilt had finally pricked her conscience, or she'd discovered the change in the will. She stepped out, dressed in a sleek beige coat, her hair perfectly styled, sunglasses perched on her head. There was no gift in her hands, no flowers, no warmth in her eyes. Just that polished confidence she always wore when she wanted something. I watched as she walked briskly to the door, phone in one hand, purse slung over her arm. When I opened the door, she greeted me with a half smile, her voice overly bright. "Dad, there you are." I smiled faintly. "Lily, I didn't expect you today." "I was in the area," she said quickly, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "Thought I'd stop by. It's been, what, a few weeks? Nearly 3 months. I corrected gently. She laughed awkwardly. "Time flies, huh?" I led her into the living room. The air felt different with her in it. Heavier, as though the silence itself was cautious. She looked around the room, her eyes lingering on the family photos on the mantel. "You haven't changed anything. Still the same old house," she said. "It's home," I replied simply. She nodded, then glanced at me. "So how have you been?" "I've been well," I said, then added with quiet emphasis, "peaceful, Ga." She shifted uncomfortably, clearly thrown off by my calmness. "That's good." Maria entered the room just then, wiping her hands on her apron. "Good afternoon, Carson," she said politely. Lily smiled thinly. "Maria, still here, huh?" "Still here," Maria replied kindly. Lily turned back to me. "Dad, could we have a moment alone?" Maria hesitated, then nodded and disappeared into the kitchen. The moment the door closed, Lily's pleasant mask slipped. Her voice sharpened. "Dad, I just got a call from Mr. Harding." I leaned back in my chair, unbothered. "Did you?" Her eyes narrowed. "He told me you made some changes to your will." "I did." She crossed her arms, jaw tightening. "And you didn't think to tell me?" "There wasn't much to tell." She stared at me, confusion giving way to anger. "You took me out of it, didn't you?" I didn't answer immediately. I looked at her, really looked at her. The little girl who used to hold my hand crossing the street was gone. In her place stood a woman, whose expression held entitlement more than affection. "Wes," I said finally. "I did." Her face twisted. "Dad, this is insane. You can't just. After everything you've promised." "I never promised anything, Lily." I interrupted gently. "Everything I ever gave you, I gave because I wanted to help. Not because I owed you." She shook her head. her voice rising. But you said the house would be mine one day. You said you wanted to make sure the kids were taken care of. I did, I said quietly. But that was before I realized the only thing my money has ever done was make you forget how to love. Her eyes widened, and for a brief moment, I saw hurt flicker across her face. Real raw. But it was quickly replaced by indignation. Come on. You're just being dramatic. It was a birthday. Dad, one birthday. You're seriously doing this, because I didn't throw you a party. I sighed. You still don't understand. What is there to understand? You're punishing me for not showing up. No, I said, my voice calm but firm. I'm not punishing you, Lily. I'm letting go. I've spent years waiting for you to call, to visit, to ask how I was without needing something in return. That day never came. So I decided to stop waiting. She scoffed, pacing the room. This is unbelievable. You're just lonely. And she gestured toward the kitchen. She's taking advantage of that. You think Maria actually cares about you? She's your employee, Dad. She's doing her job. I felt a flicker of anger, the first in a long while. She's done more than her job, I said evenly. She's been here when you weren't. When I was sick, she took care of me. When I was grieving your mother, she sat with me in silence so I wouldn't have to face it alone. She doesn't do that for money, Lily. She does it because she has a heart. Ah. Lily froze. For the first time, she didn't have a comeback ready. The truth had settled in the room, like a weight she couldn't ignore. Do you know what hurt me the most? I asked quietly. It wasn't your words on my birthday. It was the realization that I'd raised someone who couldn't see the difference between love and obligation. I don't want to leave behind a fortune that will just feed that blindness. Tears welled in her eyes, but her pride kept her voice sharp. So that's it. You're cutting me off. You're giving everything to your maid. To the person who's treated me like family. I corrected softly. She laughed bitterly. You've lost it. You're so lonely, you can't tell who's real anymore. I shook my head. No, Lily. For the first time, I finally can. She stared at me for a long moment, her chest rising and falling with uneven breaths. Then, without another word, she turned and stormed out. The door slammed so hard the picture frames rattled. Through the window, I watched her car speed down the driveway, the sound of gravel scattering in her wake. When the silence returned, it didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt earned. Maria reappeared after a few minutes, concern etched across her face. Is everything all right, Mr. Carson? I nodded slowly. It is now. She poured me a cup of tea, the kind she always made with a hint of mint. As she handed it to me, she hesitated. She's your daughter. Maybe she'll understand one day. Maybe, I said quietly, taking a sip. But I can't live waiting for that anymore. We sat there in silence for a while, the clock ticking steadily. Then Maria smiled faintly. Happy belated birthday, Mr. Carson. That made me smile too. It finally feels like one. Days turned into weeks. The leaves outside began to turn gold and red, signaling the shift of seasons. Life found a new rhythm. Maria began inviting her family over for dinner sometimes. Her son, his wife, their 2 kids. They filled the house with laughter, stories, and warmth. The first evening they came, her grandson ran up to me with a handmade card that said, "Thank you for dinner, Grandpa Aid." I didn't know whether to laugh or cry, so I did both. In their presence, the house felt alive again. The empty halls no longer echoed with absence, but with joy. It wasn't the family I'd expected. But maybe it was the one life had chosen for me. One night, as we all sat around the table, Maria raised her glass. "To Mr. Carson," she said with a smile. "For teaching us that kindness doesn't need blood to be family." Everyone clinked glasses, and for the first time in years, I felt something deep and true. Belonging. Weeks later, I received a letter in the mail. The handwriting was unmistakably Lily's. I hesitated before opening it. Dad, I've been thinking about what you said. Maybe you're right. Maybe I did take you for granted. I don't know if I can undo everything, but I'm sorry. For the birthday, for the distance, for not being there when you needed me. If you can, please forgive me. I miss you. Love, Lily. I folded the letter slowly and placed it in my journal, next to the entry I'd written the night I changed my will. There was no anger left in me. Only acceptance. People learn their lessons in their own time, and maybe this was hers. I didn't call her right away. Some silences are necessary. But I knew I'd speak to her soon. Not as a father trying to fix what was broken, but as a man finally at peace with what is. That evening, I sat on the porch with Maria and watched the sunset. The sky burned with colors that reminded me of Margaret's favorite roses. Gold, crimson, and soft violet. Beautiful, isn't it? Maria said. Wes, I replied. It is. I thought about the past, about love given freely. And love lost through neglect. I thought about the years wasted chasing affection, that should have been natural. And I thought about the strange, quiet grace of finding new family, when the old one drifts away. As the light faded, I realized something profound. Forgiveness isn't about changing the past. It's about freeing yourself from it. I looked at Maria and smiled. You know, for 70 years, I thought birthdays were about being celebrated. But now I think they're about being grateful. For whoever's still here, when the candles burn low. She nodded, her eyes soft. When I went inside later, I passed the safe where my will was locked away. I didn't need to open it again. I knew everything was just as it should be. That night, as I lay in bed, I felt the quiet hum of peace wrap around me like a warm blanket. I wasn't alone anymore. Not really. For the first time in my long, complicated life, I didn't fall asleep thinking of what I'd lost. I fell asleep grateful for what I'd found.